Marcus Whitmore had served the Kingdom of Eldoria for 15 years, his unwavering loyalty earning him the prestigious position of Senior Royal Guard at Thornwick Palace. At 38, his weathered face bore the marks of countless hours standing watch, his steel-gray eyes missing nothing that transpired within the ancient stone walls he protected. The palace, with its towering spires and elaborate gardens, had been his second home for over a decade, and he knew every secret passage, every whispered conversation that echoed through its halls. The January morning that would change everything began like any other. Snow blanketed the palace grounds, creating a pristine white carpet that muffled the sounds of the awakening court. Marcus stood at his usual post outside the Queen's private chambers, his crimson and gold uniform pressed to perfection, his ceremonial sword gleaming at his side. Queen Isabella, beloved by the people for her grace and charitable works, had ruled Eldoria with wisdom for 23 years since the unexpected death of her husband, King Frederick. As dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Marcus noticed an unusual flurry of activity in the servants' quarters below. Maids hurried through the corridors with worried expressions, their hushed conversations carrying fragments that made his trained ear perk up with concern. The morning papers had arrived earlier than usual, and from what he could gather, they contained news that would send shockwaves through the royal household. Lady Margaret Ashford, the Queen's closest advisor and confidant, emerged from her chambers with an expression Marcus had rarely seen in all his years of service. Her usually composed demeanor was cracked, revealing underlying tension that made the seasoned guard straighten instinctively. Margaret had been by the Queen's side since childhood, their friendship transcending the boundaries of royal protocol, and if something could shake her composure, it was serious indeed. The first indication that this day would be different came when Margaret approached Marcus, with trembling hands clutching a leather portfolio. Her voice, usually strong and authoritative, carried an uncharacteristic tremor as she spoke. "Marcus, I need you to ensure that no one, absolutely no one, enters the Queen's chambers without my express permission. Something has happened that requires the utmost discretion." Marcus nodded solemnly, his years of training kicking in automatically. He had protected royal secrets before, understanding that the monarchy's stability often depended on controlling information and managing crises behind closed doors. However, the gravity in Margaret's tone suggested this was no ordinary court scandal or minor diplomatic incident. Inside the Queen's private study, a room lined with centuries-old books and adorned with portraits of Eldoria's monarchs, Queen Isabella sat frozen at her mahogany desk. The morning papers lay spread before her, their headlines screaming accusations that struck at the very heart of her reign. The largest publication in the kingdom, the Eldorian Chronicle, bore a headline that made her hands shake as she read it. "Crown Princess Victoria's Secret Meetings, Evidence of Conspiracy Against the Throne." The article, spanning 3 full pages, detailed alleged secret meetings between Crown Princess Victoria and foreign diplomats, suggesting she was conspiring to overthrow her mother's government and seize power prematurely. Accompanying photographs, grainy but seemingly authentic, showed Victoria entering unmarked buildings and engaging in hushed conversations with individuals identified as representatives of Eldoria's neighboring rival kingdom, Valeria. Queen Isabella's mind raced as she absorbed the implications. Victoria, her eldest daughter and heir to the throne, had been groomed for leadership since birth. At 28, she was intelligent, compassionate, and had always shown nothing but loyalty to the crown and her mother. The idea that she would engage in treason seemed impossible, yet the evidence presented in the papers appeared damning. The Queen's hands trembled as she reached for the second newspaper, the Royal Observer, which carried an even more devastating headline. "Princess Victoria's Betrayal. Secret recordings reveal plot to dethrone Queen Isabella." The article claimed to have recordings of Victoria discussing plans to accelerate the transition of power and modernize the kingdom by removing outdated leadership. Margaret, who had been silently watching her sovereign process this devastating news, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, we need to consider that these articles might be fabricated. The timing is suspicious, coming just days before the winter parliamentary session where you were planning to announce Victoria's increased role in government affairs." But Isabella's attention had shifted to the third newspaper on her desk. The headline of the kingdom's voice made her blood run cold. Exclusive. Crown Princess Victoria accepts forays in gold for betraying Eldorian secrets. This article alleged that Victoria had been receiving substantial payments from Valerian intelligence services in exchange for confidential information about Eldoria's military capabilities and diplomatic strategies. The weight of these accusations crashed down on the Queen like an avalanche. If even a fraction of these claims were true, it would mean her own daughter had committed high treason. If they were false, it represented a sophisticated attack on the monarchy that threatened to tear the royal family apart and potentially destabilize the entire kingdom. Marcus, still standing guard outside, could hear muffled voices through the heavy oak door. His trained ear caught fragments of conversation that spoke of crisis and betrayal. Years of serving the royal family had taught him to remain impassive regardless of what transpired around him, but the tension radiating from within the Queen's chambers was palpable. The guard's mind wandered to Princess Victoria, whom he had watched grow from a precocious child into a capable young woman. He remembered countless occasions when she had shown kindness to the palace staff, her genuine concern for the kingdom's welfare, and her obvious love for her mother. The idea that she could be capable of the treachery described in the newspapers seemed to contradict everything he had observed during his years of service. As morning progressed into afternoon, the crisis deepened. More newspapers arrived, each carrying variations of the same devastating story. International publications had picked up the narrative, with headlines in neighboring kingdoms questioning Eldoria's stability and Princess Victoria's fitness to inherit the throne. The scandal was spreading beyond the kingdom's borders, threatening Eldoria's diplomatic relationships and international standing. Queen Isabella summoned her private secretary, Lord Theodore Blackwood, a man whose discretion had served the crown faithfully for over 2 decades. His arrival was marked by an unusual breach of protocol that did not escape Marcus's notice. Instead of being announced formally, Blackwood slipped into the Queen's chambers through a side entrance typically reserved for the most sensitive matters of state. The conversation between the Queen and her trusted advisor was heated, though conducted in whispers that barely carried beyond the chamber walls. Marcus caught occasional words that painted a picture of a monarchy under siege. There was talk of damage control, investigating the source, and most troublingly, preparing for the worst-case scenario. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Crown Princess Victoria remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. She was in her private garden, a sanctuary she had cultivated since childhood, tending to the winter roses that somehow managed to bloom even in the harsh January cold. The peaceful setting, with its stone benches and carefully manicured hedges, provided a stark contrast to the chaos erupting elsewhere in the palace. Victoria's personal guard, Captain William Sterling, had received unusual orders that morning. He was instructed to keep the princess in her quarters and gardens, allowing no visitors except those specifically approved by Queen Isabella herself. When Victoria questioned these restrictions, Sterling could only explain that security concerns required heightened precautions. The princess, intelligent and perceptive, sensed that something was amiss. The palace staff, usually warm and chatty, seemed nervous and distracted. Conversation stopped abruptly when she entered rooms, and she noticed several advisors hurrying through the corridors with expressions of barely concealed panic. Her requests to meet with her mother were politely deflected, with explanations about urgent matters of state requiring the Queen's immediate attention. As evening approached, the full scope of the crisis became apparent to those within the palace's inner circle. The accusations against Princess Victoria were not merely newspaper gossip, but appeared to be part of a coordinated attack designed to destroy her reputation and, by extension, damage the monarchy itself. The sophistication of the alleged evidence suggested resources and planning that pointed to a well-organized conspiracy. Queen Isabella faced the most difficult decision of her reign. Should she publicly defend her daughter without investigating the allegations, risking further damage if any truth emerged? Should she distance herself from Victoria until the matter could be resolved, potentially destroying their relationship and the princess's reputation regardless of her innocence? Or should she take the middle ground of launching a thorough investigation which would keep the scandal in the headlines for weeks or months? Margaret Ashford worked frantically to coordinate the palace's response. She had already contacted the kingdom's most trusted investigators and begun reaching out to international allies who might provide insight into the source of the allegations. However, Each hour that passed without a clear response from the palace was being interpreted by the media as confirmation of the story's validity. The Queen's youngest daughter, Princess Alexandra, 18 and still completing her education at the Royal Academy, remained sheltered from the immediate crisis. However, Margaret knew that protection could not last long. The scandal would inevitably reach every corner of the kingdom and beyond, affecting every member of the royal family. As night fell over Thornwick Palace, Marcus maintained his vigilant watch. The ancient stones seemed to hold their breath, as if the very walls understood the gravity of the situation unfolding within. The guard had witnessed many crises during his service, but none had carried the potential for such complete devastation to the institution he had sworn to protect. The Queen sat alone in her study. The newspapers spread before her like evidence of a crime she could not comprehend. The woman who had led Eldoria through economic challenges, diplomatic crises, and natural disasters now faced a threat that struck at the heart of everything she held dear. Her daughter, her successor, her legacy, all hung in the balance based on allegations that seemed designed to destroy them all. In the depths of the palace, servants whispered about the strange visitors who had been seen in recent weeks, the unusual activity in certain quarters, and the feeling that something had been building toward this moment. Marcus made mental notes of these conversations, understanding that, in times of crisis, even the smallest details could prove significant. The Kingdom of Eldoria, which had enjoyed decades of stability under Queen Isabella's rule, now teetered on the brink of a scandal that threatened to shake its very foundations. The accusations against the Crown Princess would need to be addressed, investigated, and resolved, but the damage to the royal family's reputation had already begun. As Marcus stood guard through the long January night, he could not have known that this was merely the beginning of a crisis that would test every institution of the kingdom and reveal secrets that had been buried for years within the palace walls. The royal guard who had dedicated his life to protecting the monarchy was about to become an unwitting witness to events that would change Eldoria forever. The morning newspapers had brought more than scandal. They had brought the beginning of what would prove to be the greatest challenge Queen Isabella and the royal family had ever faced. And Marcus Whitmore, faithful guardian of royal secrets, would find himself at the center of a conspiracy that reached far deeper than anyone could have imagined. The second day of the crisis dawned gray and foreboding, with heavy clouds threatening snow that never quite materialized. Marcus Whitmore had maintained his post through the night, catching only brief moments of rest when other guards could relieve him. The palace felt different now, charged with intention that made even the most routine activities feel dangerous. Servants moved through the corridors with nervous energy, and the usual morning routines were disrupted by whispered conversations and anxious glances. Queen Isabella had barely slept, spending most of the night in emergency sessions with her closest advisors. The situation had deteriorated rapidly, as international news services picked up the story about Crown Princess Victoria's alleged treachery. By dawn, diplomatic cables were pouring in from allied nations, expressing concern about Eldoria's stability and requesting clarification about the accusations against the heir apparent. Margaret Ashford had worked through the night, coordinating with the kingdom's intelligence services to investigate the source of the leaked information. What they had discovered in those dark early hours was deeply disturbing. The photographs accompanying the newspaper articles appeared to be genuine, taken with sophisticated surveillance equipment that suggested professional intelligence gathering. However, the contexts of these images remained unclear, and the conversations reportedly recorded had suspicious gaps that hinted at careful editing. The Queen's private study had been transformed into a crisis command center. Maps of the kingdom covered one wall, marked with locations where public protests had already begun forming. Citizens, confused and angry about the allegations against their beloved princess, were demanding answers from their monarch. Some supported Victoria unconditionally, viewing the accusations as foreign propaganda, while others called for her immediate removal from the line of succession until the truth could be established. Marcus observed these developments through his unique position as silent witness to the palace's inner workings. His years of service had taught him to read the subtle signs of institutional stress, and what he saw troubled him deeply. The normally smooth coordination between different departments of the royal household was breaking down under the pressure of managing an unprecedented crisis. Princess Victoria, still largely isolated from the full scope of the scandal, had spent a restless night in her chambers. Captain Sterling had been forced to inform her that morning appointments were being postponed indefinitely due to security concerns. But the princess was no fool. She could sense the change in atmosphere throughout the palace and demanded to speak with her mother immediately. The confrontation between mother and daughter took place in the Queen's private sitting room, a space normally reserved for family moments and personal reflection. Marcus, stationed outside, could hear the conversation through the heavy doors, though he tried to maintain professional detachment from the royal family's personal anguish. "Mother, I demand to know what is happening." Victoria's voice carried clearly, her tone mixing frustration with growing alarm. "The staff won't look me in the eye. My appointments have been cancelled, and Sterling treats me like I'm under house arrest. What has occurred that requires such secrecy?" Queen Isabella's response was measured but strained. "My dear daughter, there have been certain allegations published in this morning's newspapers that require careful investigation. Until we can determine their validity and source, it is prudent to limit your public appearances and external contacts." The silence that followed was more telling than any words. Marcus had witnessed enough royal crises to recognize the moment when innocent parties first comprehended the gravity of accusations against them. When Victoria finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely. "What kind of allegations? What exactly am I being accused of?" The Queen's explanation was careful and diplomatic, but the core facts could not be softened. As she detailed the newspaper headlines and their claims about Victoria's supposed treasonous activities, the princess's responses evolved from disbelief to horror to righteous anger. "These accusations are completely false," Victoria declared with the force of absolute conviction. "I have never met with foreign agents, never received payments from any foreign government, and certainly never conspired against your throne or our kingdom. Mother, surely you cannot believe I am capable of such betrayal." Isabella's voice carried the weight of her internal struggle when she replied, "I do not want to believe these things of you, Victoria. However, as Queen, I cannot simply dismiss evidence because I wish it were untrue. We must investigate thoroughly and respond appropriately to protect the crown and the kingdom." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Victoria providing detailed accounts of her activities during the times when she was allegedly meeting with foreign conspirators. She had been visiting charitable organizations, attending cultural events, and meeting with university officials about education reforms. Each activity was documented and witnessed. Yet somehow the newspapers had presented an alternate narrative of treasonous conspiracy. Marcus found himself remembering specific instances when he had observed Princess Victoria during the time frames mentioned in the accusations. His duty often required him to accompany members of the royal family to public events, and he could recall several occasions that now seemed to align with the suspicious meetings described in the newspapers. However, his recollections differed significantly from the implications presented by the press. One particular event stood out in his memory. 3 weeks earlier, he had accompanied Princess Victoria to what was supposedly a university lecture about sustainable agriculture. They had arrived at the appointed location, a building in the university district, but the event had been unexpectedly cancelled. Victoria had seemed genuinely surprised by this development and had suggested visiting a nearby orphanage instead, where she spent the afternoon reading to children and discussing their educational needs with the staff. The building where the cancelled lecture was supposed to occur now featured prominently in one of the newspaper photographs. With Victoria apparently entering for a clandestine meeting, Marcus realized that the innocent visit had been photographed and its context deliberately misrepresented to support the conspiracy narrative. This revelation troubled him deeply because it suggested that Princess Victoria had been under surveillance for weeks, if not months. Someone had been watching her movements, photographing her activities, and building a dossier that could be manipulated to support false accusations. The sophistication of this operation implied resources and planning that extended far beyond simple political opposition or media sensationalism. Meanwhile, throughout the kingdom, public reaction to the scandal was intensifying. In the capital city of Thornwick, crowds had gathered outside the Parliament building demanding answers. Some citizens carried signs supporting Princess Victoria, proclaiming their belief in her innocence and condemning the lies being spread about their future queen. Others called for her immediate trial and punishment if the accusations proved true. The kingdom's major religious leaders issued a joint statement calling for calm and rational investigation of the allegations. However, their carefully neutral language satisfied neither Victoria's supporters nor her accusers, instead adding to the sense that the very foundations of Eldorian society were being shaken by the crisis. International reactions were equally troubling for the royal household. The neighboring kingdom of Valeria, specifically mentioned in the newspaper articles as the source of the alleged bribes and conspiracies, issued a strong denial of any involvement with Princess Victoria. However, their statement also expressed concern about instability in Eldoria and suggested that perhaps the allegations, while false, indicated deeper problems within the Eldorian government. Queen Isabella's intelligence advisors briefed her on intercepted communications, suggesting that several foreign governments were closely monitoring the situation, prepared to take advantage of any weakening of Eldorian leadership. The scandal was not merely a domestic crisis, but a potential threat to national security that required careful management to prevent exploitation by hostile forces. By midday, the palace communications office was overwhelmed with requests from domestic and international media outlets seeking official responses to the allegations. Margaret Ashford drafted multiple versions of potential statements, each attempting to balance the need for decisive leadership with the requirement for careful legal and factual review of the accusations. The most challenging aspect of crafting any response was the apparent authenticity of some evidence supporting the accusations. While the contexts had clearly been manipulated and the interpretations were false, the photographs themselves appeared genuine. This created a complex situation where denying the evidence entirely might seem dishonest, while acknowledging its existence could be interpreted as confirming guilt. Princess Victoria requested permission to issue her own public statement denying the accusations, but Queen Isabella's advisors strongly recommended against any immediate response from the accused party. Legal experts warned that premature statements could complicate future investigations and potentially provide additional ammunition for whoever was orchestrating the attack on the princess's reputation. The afternoon brought a development that sent new shockwaves through the palace. Lord Theodore Blackwood, the Queen's private secretary, received a confidential communication from a trusted source within the intelligence services. The preliminary investigation into the scandal's origins had uncovered evidence suggesting that the attack on Princess Victoria was part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple foreign intelligence services and domestic collaborators. The intelligence report, classified at the highest level and shared only with the Queen's most trusted advisors, indicated that the scandal was designed to achieve multiple objectives. The primary goal appeared to be destabilizing the Eldorian monarchy by destroying public confidence in the succession. However, secondary objectives included damaging Eldoria's international relationships and creating opportunities for foreign economic and political influence. Marcus, while not privy to these classified briefings, observed the impact of this new information on the palace atmosphere. The crisis was evolving from a scandal management challenge into a national security emergency. Additional security personnel were quietly deployed throughout the palace, and he noticed intelligence officers conducting discreet interviews with staff members about any unusual activities they might have observed in recent months. The investigation's expansion brought uncomfortable revelations about security vulnerabilities within the royal household. Someone with access to Princess Victoria's schedule and knowledge of her activities had provided information to the conspiracy's orchestrators. This implied that the attack on the monarchy had been facilitated by a traitor within the palace itself. Queen Isabella faced the devastating possibility that someone she trusted, someone within her inner circle, had betrayed not only the crown but her personally. The list of individuals with the necessary access and information was disturbingly short, including only her most trusted advisors, senior staff members, and security personnel. As evening approached, the Queen made the difficult decision to expand the investigation to include background checks and surveillance of her own staff. This represented a fundamental violation of the trust that had traditionally characterized relationships within the royal household. But the security of the kingdom demanded extraordinary measures. The announcement to the staff about enhanced security procedures was carefully worded to avoid creating panic, while making clear that cooperation with investigators was mandatory. Marcus, along with every other member of the royal guard, would be subject to detailed questioning about their recent activities and contacts. The investigation would examine financial records, communications, and personal relationships to identify any potential sources of compromise. Princess Victoria, still confined to her chambers and private gardens, struggled with the isolation and uncertainty surrounding her situation. Captain Sterling, tasked with managing her security while respecting her royal status, found himself in the uncomfortable position of being both protector and jailer. The princess's frustration was understandable, but releasing her into public view while the investigation continued could expose her to additional attacks or compromise the inquiry's integrity. The day ended with Queen Isabella alone in her study, surrounded by intelligence reports, newspaper clippings, and legal advisories. The woman who had led Eldoria with confidence and wisdom for over 2 decades now faced a crisis that threatened everything she had worked to build and protect. Her daughter's reputation, the monarchy's stability, and the kingdom's security all hung in the balance. Marcus maintained his vigil outside the Queen's chambers, understanding that his role as guardian of royal secrets had never been more critical. The palace held its breath as investigators worked through the night, searching for evidence that might reveal the true scope of the conspiracy and identify those responsible for orchestrating the attack on Princess Victoria and the crown. The second day of the crisis concluded with more questions than answers, but also with a growing understanding that the allegations against the crown princess represented something far more dangerous than simple political opposition or media sensationalism. The kingdom of Eldoria was under attack, and the battle for its future was just beginning. The third day brought revelations that would shatter the foundations of trust within Thornwick Palace. Marcus Whitmore arrived for his morning shift to find the ancient corridors buzzing with an energy that felt both electric and ominous. During the night, the intelligence investigation had uncovered evidence that sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government, and the implications would change everything about how the royal family understood their crisis. Queen Isabella had been awakened at 4 a.m. by Margaret Ashford, who carried a classified intelligence briefing that could not wait for normal morning hours. The document, marked with the highest security classifications, contained surveillance photographs and intercepted communications that painted a picture of betrayal far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The investigation had identified the source of the leaked photographs and manipulated evidence used to frame Princess Victoria. The trail led to a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been planning the attack on the monarchy for over 18 months. However, the most devastating discovery was not about foreign involvement, but about domestic treachery that reached into the very heart of the royal household. Marcus noticed the change immediately when he took his position outside the Queen's chambers. The usual staff members who managed the morning routines had been replaced by intelligence officers wearing palace uniforms. Senior advisors moved through the corridors with expressions of barely controlled shock, and he observed several individuals being quietly escorted from the building by security personnel. Lord Theodore Blackwood, the Queen's private secretary for over 20 years, had been arrested during the early morning hours. The man who had managed the most sensitive aspects of royal communications and scheduling was now under investigation for providing information to foreign intelligence services. His betrayal explained how the conspiracy had obtained detailed knowledge of Princess Victoria's activities and movements. The evidence against Blackwood was overwhelming. Financial records revealed substantial payments from offshore accounts linked to Valerian intelligence services. Encrypted communications found on his personal devices contained detailed reports about royal family activities, security procedures, and sensitive government information. Most damaging of all, investigators discovered that Blackwood had been providing advance notice of Princess Victoria's schedule to the surveillance teams that photographed her innocent activities. Margaret Ashford briefed Queen Isabella on the scope of Blackwood's treachery, with barely controlled emotion. The man they had trusted with their most sensitive information had been systematically betraying the crown for almost 2 years. His position as private secretary had given him access to virtually every aspect of royal operations, making him an invaluable asset for any organization seeking to damage or destabilize the monarchy. The investigation revealed that Blackwood's recruitment by foreign intelligence had been gradual and sophisticated. Initial contact had been made through what appeared to be legitimate academic conferences about royal history and constitutional law. Over months, he had been cultivated with flattery, intellectual discussions, and eventually financial incentives that grew increasingly substantial. His betrayal extended far beyond providing information for the current attack on Princess Victoria. Intelligence analysts discovered that Blackwood had been feeding information about Eldorian diplomatic negotiations, military capabilities, and economic policies to foreign governments for nearly 2 years. The damage to national security was still being assessed, but preliminary estimates suggested that multiple ongoing diplomatic initiatives had been compromised by his treachery. Princess Victoria, still largely isolated from these developments, sensed the changed atmosphere when Captain Sterling arrived with news that she would be permitted to meet with her mother immediately. The relief in his demeanor was obvious, though he remained professionally discreet about the reasons for this sudden change in her circumstances. The reunion between Queen Isabella and Crown Princess Victoria took place in the palace's private family quarters, away from the formal rooms where affairs of state were normally conducted. For the first time in 3 days, Marcus observed genuine emotion flowing between mother and daughter as they embraced with the fervor of individuals who had feared their relationship might be permanently damaged by false accusations. "My darling daughter," Queen Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the deepest apology. The investigation has revealed that you were the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy your reputation and damage our family. The evidence against you was manufactured by traitors within our own household." Victoria's response mixed relief with righteous anger. "Mother, I never doubted that the truth would emerge, but I confess that I feared the damage to our family and kingdom might be irreversible. How could someone we trusted betray us so completely?" The Queen explained the evidence against Blackwood and the broader conspiracy that had been uncovered by the investigation. The sophisticated nature of the attack had required extensive planning and resources, suggesting coordination between foreign intelligence services and domestic collaborators. Blackwood had been the primary source of information, but investigators suspected that additional traitors might exist within the government or palace staff. Marcus, listening from his post outside the family quarters, felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. While Princess Victoria's innocence had been established, the revelation of extensive treachery within the royal household raised new questions about security and trust. If someone as trusted as Lord Blackwood could betray the crown so completely, what other threats might exist within the palace walls? The intelligence briefing continued throughout the morning, as investigators presented Queen Isabella with the full scope of their discoveries. The conspiracy involved not only Valerian intelligence services, but also coordinated elements from 2 other neighboring kingdoms that had territorial disputes with Eldoria. The attack on Princess Victoria was designed to be the opening move in a broader campaign to destabilize Eldorian leadership and create opportunities for foreign influence. The manufactured evidence had been remarkably sophisticated, involving edited audio recordings, manipulated photographs, and forged documents that would have been difficult to disprove without extensive technical analysis. The conspiracy's orchestrators had clearly studied previous intelligence operations and applied lessons learned from successful disinformation campaigns in other nations. Margaret Ashford coordinated the palace's response to these revelations, working with legal advisors to determine how much information could be publicly disclosed without compromising ongoing security operations. The challenge was to clear Princess Victoria's reputation and restore public confidence while protecting intelligence sources and methods that might be needed for future investigations. The first public statement from the palace came at midday, carefully crafted to balance multiple competing interests. Queen Isabella announced that a thorough investigation had revealed that the accusations against Crown Princess Victoria were entirely false and based on evidence that was deliberately manufactured by foreign intelligence services working with domestic traitors. The statement confirmed that arrests had been made and that the investigation was ongoing, but avoided specific details that might compromise security operations. Most importantly, it declared the Queen's complete confidence in Princess Victoria's loyalty and integrity and announced that she would resume her normal schedule of royal duties immediately. Public reaction to the palace statement was swift and dramatic. Princess Victoria's supporters, who had maintained their faith in her innocence throughout the crisis, celebrated the vindication with demonstrations of joy throughout the kingdom. However, the revelation that foreign intelligence services had successfully infiltrated the royal household sparked new concerns about national security and the effectiveness of Eldorian counterintelligence capabilities. Opposition political parties, while welcoming the exoneration of the Crown Princess, demanded a full parliamentary investigation into how foreign agents had gained such extensive access to sensitive government information. They questioned whether additional security breaches might exist, and called for comprehensive reforms to intelligence and security procedures. International reactions were equally complex. Allied nations expressed relief that Eldoria's succession remained stable but privately voiced concerns about the kingdom's vulnerability to foreign intelligence operations. The successful penetration of the royal household suggested systemic security weaknesses that could affect bilateral relationships and shared intelligence operations. The Kingdom of Valeria, identified as a primary orchestrator of the conspiracy, issued a strongly worded denial of any involvement in intelligence operations against Eldoria. However, diplomatic sources reported that Valerian officials were quietly expressing surprise at the sophistication of the operation and the extent of information that had been obtained about Eldorian royal activities. Princess Victoria's first public appearance after her exoneration was carefully choreographed to demonstrate both her resilience and the royal family's unity. She appeared alongside Queen Isabella at a ceremony honoring veterans of Eldorian military service, sending a clear message that the monarchy remained strong despite the recent attacks. Marcus observed the princess closely during this public appearance, noting the subtle changes that the crisis had wrought in her demeanor. While she maintained her characteristic grace and composure, there was a new steel in her bearing that suggested the experience had strengthened rather than weakened her resolve to serve the kingdom effectively. The ceremony also served as an opportunity for Queen Isabella to demonstrate her continued confidence in her daughter's abilities and judgment. She publicly praised Victoria's handling of the crisis and announced that the princess would be taking on additional responsibilities in preparation for her eventual succession to the throne. However, beneath the public displays of unity and confidence, the royal family struggled with the personal impact of the betrayal they had experienced. The discovery that someone they had trusted completely had been systematically betraying them for years had shaken their faith in their ability to judge character and maintain security. Margaret Ashford worked closely with intelligence officials to implement new security procedures designed to prevent similar penetrations in the future. These measures included enhanced background checks for all staff members, improved compartmentalization of sensitive information, and regular security assessments of personnel with access to royal activities. The investigation into Blackwood's treachery continued to yield disturbing revelations about the extent of his betrayal. Financial analysis revealed that he had received over 2 million Eldorian crowns from foreign intelligence services over the course of his cooperation. The payments had been carefully structured to avoid detection, using offshore accounts and cryptocurrency transfers that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of financial surveillance capabilities. Most troubling was the discovery that Blackwood had been planning to escalate his activities significantly in the coming months. Intercepted communications revealed discussions about recruiting additional assets within the palace and government, suggesting that the attack on Princess Victoria was intended to be only the beginning of a sustained campaign against Eldorian institutions. The intelligence services also uncovered evidence that similar operations were being planned or were already underway against other royal families and democratic governments throughout the region. The attack on Eldoria appeared to be part of a broader strategy to destabilize traditional European monarchies and create opportunities for authoritarian expansion. As evening approached, Marcus reflected on the dramatic changes that had occurred over just 3 days. The crisis had begun with devastating accusations against the crown princess and had evolved into a complex international intelligence investigation that revealed threats far beyond anything the royal family had previously imagined. Princess Victoria, now cleared of all accusations and resuming her royal duties, had emerged from the crisis with enhanced credibility and public support. However, the personal cost of the experience was evident in the caution with which she now approached new relationships and the wariness that had replaced her previously open trust in those around her. Queen Isabella faced the challenge of rebuilding confidence in royal security while maintaining the accessibility and transparency that had characterized her reign. The balance between necessary security measures and the openness that connected the monarchy to its people would require careful navigation in the months ahead. The third day of the crisis concluded with the royal family stronger in some ways but forever changed by their encounter with sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. Marcus Whitmore, the faithful guard who had witnessed these events unfold, understood that his role as protector of royal secrets had taken on new dimensions that would shape the remainder of his career in service to the crown. 2 weeks after the initial crisis, Marcus Whitmore stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the palace gardens, his breath visible in the crisp February air. The grounds were peaceful now, but the tranquility was deceptive. The investigation into Lord Blackwood's treachery had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations, uncovering a web of conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Eldorian society and beyond the kingdom's borders. The intensive security review that followed Blackwood's arrest had yielded disturbing discoveries about the extent of foreign intelligence penetration into Eldorian institutions. What had begun as an investigation into attacks on Princess Victoria had evolved into a comprehensive counterintelligence operation that was reshaping the kingdom's understanding of modern security threats. Queen Isabella had spent the previous evening in emergency sessions with the heads of Eldorian intelligence services, reviewing classified reports that painted a picture of sustained foreign infiltration spanning multiple government departments. The sophistication of these operations suggested that hostile foreign powers had been working systematically to compromise Eldorian sovereignty for years, with the attack on Princess Victoria serving as merely one component of a much larger campaign. The Queen's private study had been transformed into a secure communications center where she could receive sensitive briefings without risk of surveillance or interception. Marcus had observed intelligence technicians installing sophisticated security equipment that created what they termed a clean room for discussing classified matters. The fact that such measures were necessary within the royal palace itself demonstrated how completely the kingdom's previous security assumptions had been shattered. Princess Victoria had thrown herself into her royal duties with renewed vigor following her exoneration, but the experience had changed her fundamentally. Marcus noticed the subtle differences in her behavior during public appearances and private moments alike. She was more observant, more cautious about her surroundings, and had developed an almost unconscious habit of scanning crowds for potential threats or surveillance. The princess had also become deeply involved in reviewing the intelligence reports about the conspiracy against her. Her analytical mind and fresh perspective had proven valuable to investigators, trying to understand the full scope of the attacks on the monarchy. She insisted on understanding not just what had happened to her, but why she had been targeted and how similar operations might be prevented in the future. Margaret Ashford coordinated between the various investigating agencies, ensuring that the royal family received complete information while maintaining the security protocols necessary to protect ongoing operations. Her role had evolved from managing routine palace communications to serving as the primary liaison between the monarchy and the intelligence community during what was effectively a national security crisis. The investigation had revealed that Blackwood's recruitment by foreign intelligence services was part of a pattern repeated throughout Eldorian government and society. Intelligence analysts had identified at least 12 other individuals in sensitive positions who had been compromised through similar methods. The scope of penetration suggested a coordinated campaign that had been building for years before culminating in the direct attack on the royal family. Most disturbing was the discovery that the foreign intelligence services involved had been specifically targeting the monarchy as the symbolic heart of Eldorian national identity. Internal documents recovered from Blackwood's communications revealed detailed psychological profiles of royal family members and strategies designed to exploit what hostile analysts perceived as weaknesses in their personalities and relationships. The attack on Princess Victoria had been carefully designed to achieve maximum damage to the monarchy's credibility and stability. Intelligence planners had identified her as the most vulnerable target due to her high-profile, active public role and status as heir to the throne. The false accusations of treason were specifically crafted to undermine public confidence in the royal succession and create lasting doubt about the family's loyalty to the kingdom. Queen Isabella struggled with the personal implications of these revelations. The intelligence reports made clear that her family had been under sustained surveillance and analysis by hostile foreign powers for years. Private conversations, personal relationships, and individual psychological characteristics had all been studied and catalogued as part of the campaign against the monarchy. The Queen convened a series of private meetings with her closest advisors to discuss how the royal family should respond to these discoveries. The challenge was to address the serious security threats that had been uncovered while maintaining the public accessibility and transparency that had characterized her reign and connected the monarchy to the Eldorian people. Parliament had demanded comprehensive briefings about the intelligence investigation, leading to classified sessions where senior government officials learned the full scope of foreign penetration into Eldorian institutions. The revelations shocked even experienced politicians who thought they understood the kingdom's security challenges. Opposition leaders, while supporting the government's response to the crisis, called for fundamental reforms to intelligence and security procedures. They argued that the successful penetration of the royal household demonstrated systemic failures that required comprehensive changes to how the kingdom protected itself from foreign intelligence operations. The international implications of the investigation continued to expand as allied intelligence services shared information about similar operations discovered in their own countries. What had initially appeared to be an isolated attack on the Eldorian monarchy was revealed to be part of a broader campaign targeting democratic institutions and traditional monarchies throughout Europe. Princess Victoria requested a private meeting with Marcus and other senior security personnel who had been directly involved in protecting the royal family during the crisis. She wanted to understand how the security failures had occurred and what changes would be implemented to prevent similar penetrations in the future. The meeting took place in a secure conference room deep within the palace, equipped with the latest counter-surveillance technology. Princess Victoria's questions were direct and informed, demonstrating that she had studied the intelligence reports carefully and understood the technical aspects of the threats facing the royal family. "Marcus," she said, addressing him directly, "you have served our family faithfully for 15 years. During the recent crisis, you observed activities and conversations that must have seemed suspicious in hindsight. I want to understand how someone like Blackwood could operate undetected for so long while under the observation of dedicated professionals like yourself." Marcus chose his words carefully, understanding that his response would help shape future security procedures. "Your Royal Highness, Lord Blackwood's position as private secretary gave him legitimate reasons to access virtually any information or location within the palace. His activities appeared normal because they were consistent with his official duties. The sophistication of his handlers meant that his communications with foreign intelligence were conducted through methods that would not have appeared suspicious to normal security observation." The princess pressed for more details about the security failures that had enabled the conspiracy to succeed. Marcus and the other security officials explained how the traditional trust-based culture of the royal household had been exploited by individuals who understood its vulnerabilities and weaknesses. "The challenge," explained Captain Sterling, "is that the effectiveness of royal security has always depended on a balance between protection and accessibility. If we implement security measures appropriate for a military facility, we fundamentally change the nature of the monarchy and its relationship with the people. However, the recent events demonstrate that our previous security assumptions were inadequate for modern intelligence threats." Princess Victoria listened carefully to these explanations before offering her own perspective on the security challenges facing the royal family. "It seems to me that we must find ways to maintain our connection to the Eldorian people while adapting to the reality that hostile foreign powers view our family as a strategic target. This requires not just better security procedures, but a fundamental reconsideration of how the monarchy operates in the modern world." The discussion continued for over 2 hours, covering everything from personnel security procedures to communications protocols and public appearance arrangements. Princess Victoria's engagement with these technical security matters impressed the experienced professionals present and demonstrated her commitment to preventing similar attacks in the future. Meanwhile, the investigation into the broader conspiracy continued to yield significant discoveries. Intelligence analysts had identified the specific foreign intelligence services responsible for orchestrating the campaign against the Eldorian monarchy and had begun developing comprehensive profiles of their methods and objectives. The lead organization appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence unit within the Valerian government that specialized in what they termed institutional destabilization operations. Their mission was to undermine traditional democratic and monarchical institutions through a combination of intelligence penetration, disinformation campaigns, and strategic support for domestic opposition groups. The attack on Princess Victoria represented a new evolution in their methods, demonstrating capabilities that suggested extensive study of successful intelligence operations conducted by other hostile powers. The sophistication of the false evidence they had manufactured indicated access to advanced technical resources and expertise in psychological manipulation. Queen Isabella received a comprehensive briefing on these findings from the director of Eldorian Intelligence Services. The scope and sophistication of the threats facing the kingdom were far greater than anyone had previously understood, requiring substantial changes to how the government protected its institutions and personnel. The briefing included detailed recommendations for enhancing security throughout the government, with particular attention to protecting the royal family and other high-value targets. However, the director emphasized that security measures alone would not be sufficient to address the full scope of the threat. "Your Majesty," he explained, "the hostile intelligence services involved in this campaign understand that their ultimate objective is not simply to gather information, but to undermine public confidence in Eldorian institutions. This means that our response must address not just the security vulnerabilities they exploited, but also the information warfare techniques they employed to manipulate public opinion." The intelligence director outlined a comprehensive counterintelligence strategy that would involve enhanced security procedures, improved information sharing between government agencies, and new capabilities for detecting and responding to disinformation campaigns. The strategy would require significant resources and coordination between multiple government departments. Most importantly, the strategy recognized that the monarchy itself had become a primary target for hostile intelligence operations. This meant that protecting the royal family was no longer simply a matter of personal security, but a critical component of national defense that required the highest level of attention and resources. As the day progressed, Princess Victoria met privately with her mother to discuss the long-term implications of what they had learned about the threats facing their family and kingdom. The conversation took place in the Queen's private sitting room, the same space where they had confronted the initial crisis just 2 weeks earlier. "Mother," Victoria said, "these revelations about the conspiracy against our family have made me realize that my role as heir to the throne carries responsibilities I had not fully appreciated. The hostile intelligence services that targeted me understood that attacking the royal succession could destabilize our entire kingdom. I need to prepare myself not just for the traditional duties of monarchy, but for the reality that our family will continue to be targeted by sophisticated foreign adversaries." Queen Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "The burden of monarchy has always included personal sacrifice for the good of the kingdom, but I confess that I had not anticipated the extent to which hostile foreign powers would view our family as a strategic target. We must adapt to this reality while maintaining the essential connection between the crown and our people that gives the monarchy its legitimacy and strength." The conversation between mother and daughter continued as they discussed specific changes that would be needed in how the royal family conducted their public duties and private lives. The challenge was to implement necessary security measures without fundamentally altering the character of the monarchy or its relationship with the Eldorian people. Marcus, maintaining his post outside the royal family's private quarters, reflected on the dramatic changes that had occurred in just 2 weeks. The crisis had begun with devastating accusations against Princess Victoria and had evolved into a comprehensive examination of the threats facing democratic institutions in the modern world. The investigation was far from complete, and Marcus understood that the discoveries made so far were likely to be only the beginning of a much larger effort to understand and counter sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. The royal family, having survived the initial attack, now faced the challenge of adapting to a fundamentally changed security environment while maintaining their essential role in Eldorian society. The fourth phase of the crisis concluded with the royal family stronger and more united than before, but also sobered by their new understanding of the threats they faced. The Kingdom of Eldoria had discovered that its traditional values and institutions were under systematic attack by sophisticated foreign adversaries, requiring adaptation and vigilance that would reshape the monarchy for generations to come. 3 months after the initial crisis, The kingdom of Eldoria had transformed in ways that would have seemed unimaginable during those first dark days of January. Marcus Whitmore stood at his familiar post outside Queen Isabella's chambers, but the palace around him bore little resemblance to the institution he had served for 15 years. The revelation of extensive foreign intelligence penetration had necessitated fundamental changes in how the royal household operated, while the broader investigation had reshaped Eldorian society's understanding of the threats facing democratic institutions in the modern world. The spring morning carried the scent of blooming flowers from the palace gardens, but the peaceful atmosphere was maintained by security measures that remained largely invisible to casual observers. The sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities developed in response to the conspiracy had become permanent features of royal protection, seamlessly integrated into daily operations while preserving the accessibility that connected the monarchy to its people. Queen Isabella had emerged from the crisis as a stronger and more determined leader, her response to the attacks on her family earning widespread respect both domestically and internationally. The decisive action she had taken to investigate and counter the conspiracy had demonstrated the monarchy's resilience and adaptability, qualities that proved essential for leadership in an era of sophisticated information warfare. Princess Victoria's transformation had been even more remarkable. The false accusations that had threatened to destroy her reputation had instead catalyzed her development into a more formidable and strategic leader. Her insistence on understanding every aspect of the conspiracy and her active participation in developing countermeasures had impressed intelligence professionals and government officials who would eventually serve under her reign. The comprehensive investigation led by Eldorian intelligence services had uncovered a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. The network of foreign agents and domestic collaborators identified during the inquiry included individuals in sensitive positions throughout government, media, academia, and business. The scope of penetration had required a coordinated response that reshaped how the kingdom protected its institutions and personnel. Marcus had been deeply involved in the security review that followed these discoveries. His years of faithful service and detailed knowledge of palace operations made him valuable to investigators seeking to understand how security vulnerabilities had been exploited. More importantly, his unwavering loyalty during the crisis had earned him new responsibilities in implementing the enhanced security procedures that now protected the royal family. The investigation had revealed that the conspiracy against Princess Victoria was part of a multi-year campaign designed to destabilize European democratic institutions through carefully coordinated attacks on their symbolic and practical foundations. The monarchy, as the embodiment of Eldorian national identity and continuity, had been identified as a particularly valuable target for hostile foreign powers seeking to undermine Western democratic values. The sophistication of the intelligence operation that had targeted the royal family had surprised even experienced counterintelligence professionals. The careful cultivation of assets like Lord Blackwood, the technical sophistication of the surveillance operations, and the psychological precision of the disinformation campaign demonstrated capabilities that required substantial resources and expertise. Lord Blackwood's trial had become a focal point for public understanding of the threats facing democratic societies. The evidence presented during the proceedings revealed not just his individual betrayal, but the systematic methods employed by hostile intelligence services to identify, recruit, and manage human assets within target institutions. The trial proceedings, conducted under careful security protocols that protected sensitive intelligence methods while ensuring public transparency, had educated Eldorian citizens about the reality of modern espionage and information warfare. The revelations had strengthened rather than weakened public support for the monarchy, as citizens understood that the attacks on Princess Victoria represented broader threats to their democratic way of life. Princess Victoria had requested permission to attend portions of Blackwood's trial, seeking to understand firsthand how the conspiracy against her had been developed and implemented. Queen Isabella had initially resisted this request, concerned about the personal impact of confronting her betrayer directly, but ultimately agreed when Victoria argued that understanding the enemy's methods was essential for preventing similar attacks. The confrontation between Princess Victoria and Lord Blackwood during his testimony was one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. Marcus, present as part of the princess's security detail, witnessed an exchange that demonstrated how completely the crisis had transformed her from a trusting young woman into a steely future monarch. "Lord Blackwood," Princess Victoria had said during a recess when she was permitted to address the defendant directly, "I want you to understand that your betrayal has not weakened our family or our kingdom, but has instead taught us valuable lessons about the threats we face and the vigilance required to protect our democratic institutions. Your foreign handlers failed to understand that attacks on the monarchy would ultimately strengthen rather than weaken the bond between the crown and our people." Blackwood's response had been a mixture of defiance and regret. "Your Royal Highness, I believed that I was serving a higher cause by working to prevent what I saw as the outdated institution of monarchy from hindering democratic progress. I realize now that I was manipulated by foreign powers who used my ideological convictions to serve their strategic objectives rather than any genuine democratic principles." The exchange had encapsulated the larger themes of the conspiracy and its aftermath. The foreign intelligence services involved had successfully exploited ideological divisions within Eldorian society, but their ultimate objective had been strategic advantage rather than any genuine commitment to democratic reform. The international ramifications of the investigation had been equally significant. The evidence gathered by Eldorian intelligence services had been shared with allied nations, leading to the discovery of similar operations targeting democratic institutions throughout Europe and beyond. The conspiracy against the Eldorian monarchy had been part of a coordinated campaign that required international cooperation to address effectively. Queen Isabella had played a leading role in coordinating the international response to these discoveries. Her personal experience with sophisticated intelligence attacks had given her unique credibility when discussing these threats with other heads of state and government officials. The crisis that had initially threatened to destroy her family's reputation had instead established her as a respected leader in addressing modern security challenges. The domestic political impact of the revelations had been complex, but ultimately positive for the monarchy's long-term stability. Opposition parties had initially attempted to use the security failures revealed by the investigation to criticize the government's competence, but the scope and sophistication of the foreign intelligence operation had made clear that the threats transcended normal political divisions. Parliament had ultimately united behind comprehensive reforms designed to enhance the kingdom's resilience against future intelligence operations. The legislative response included enhanced funding for counterintelligence capabilities, new legal frameworks for addressing information warfare, and improved coordination between government agencies responsible for national security. The media's role in the initial crisis had also undergone significant examination and reform. The ease with which hostile intelligence services had manipulated news coverage through planted stories and manufactured evidence had demonstrated vulnerabilities in how information was verified and disseminated. New industry standards and government regulations had been developed to enhance media resilience against disinformation campaigns while preserving the press freedom that was essential to democratic accountability. The reforms recognized that a free press was both a target for hostile intelligence operations. Marcus had been promoted to Deputy Chief of Royal Security, a position that reflected both his loyal service during the crisis and the expanded security requirements that now governed royal protection. His new responsibilities included oversight of the technological systems that monitored for potential intelligence threats and coordination with government agencies involved in counterintelligence operations. The enhanced security measures implemented throughout the royal household had required careful balance between necessary protection and the accessibility that connected the monarchy to its people. The solution involved sophisticated but largely invisible technologies that could detect potential threats without creating barriers between the royal family and Eldorian citizens. Princess Victoria had become deeply involved in these security planning discussions, recognizing that her future role as queen would require her to understand and manage complex threats that previous monarchs had never faced. Her engagement with technical security matters had impressed professionals who would be responsible for protecting her throughout her reign. The princess had also taken on a new public role as an advocate for democratic resilience and international cooperation against sophisticated threats. Her speeches about the importance of vigilance against foreign interference had resonated with audiences both domestically and internationally, establishing her as a credible voice on security matters that would serve her well as a future head of state. Queen Isabella's handling of the crisis had strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy's position in Eldorian society. Public opinion surveys showed increased support for the royal family and greater appreciation for the challenges facing democratic institutions in the modern world. The Queen's decisive response to the attacks had demonstrated that traditional institutions could adapt and respond effectively to contemporary threats. The investigation's conclusion had brought justice for those involved in the conspiracy, while providing valuable intelligence about the methods and objectives of hostile foreign powers. The network of agents and collaborators identified during the inquiry had been systematically dismantled, significantly degrading the capability of foreign intelligence services to conduct similar operations in the future. However, the intelligence professionals involved in the investigation emphasized that the threat from sophisticated foreign intelligence operations remained ongoing and would require continued vigilance and adaptation. The conspiracy against Princess Victoria had been defeated, but similar threats would undoubtedly emerge as hostile powers developed new methods and identified new vulnerabilities. The personal cost of the crisis for the royal family had been significant, but ultimately strengthening. The false accusations against Princess Victoria and the revelation of extensive surveillance and betrayal had been traumatic experiences that tested family bonds and personal resilience. However, their successful navigation of these challenges had deepened their understanding of their responsibilities and strengthened their commitment to serving the Eldorian people. Queen Isabella reflected on these changes during a private moment in her study, the same room where she had first confronted the devastating newspaper headlines that had launched the crisis. The space had been thoroughly renovated with new security features, but it remained fundamentally the same sanctuary where she had made the difficult decisions that shaped the kingdom's response to unprecedented threats. "Marcus," she said during one of their private security briefings, "the events of recent months have taught us that the monarchy's survival depends not just on tradition and ceremony, but on our ability to adapt to changing threats while preserving the essential qualities that connect the crown to our people. Your faithful service during our most difficult period has been invaluable, and I want you to know that your dedication has been noticed and appreciated." Marcus responded with the formal courtesy that had characterized his service throughout his career. But the Queen's acknowledgement of his role during the crisis represented a personal validation that meant more than any official recognition or promotion. As spring progressed toward summer, the Kingdom of Eldoria had emerged stronger and more resilient from its encounter with sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. The monarchy had demonstrated its ability to adapt to modern threats while maintaining its essential character and popular support. Princess Victoria's reputation had not only been restored, but enhanced by her response to the false accusations against her. The experience had transformed her from a promising heir into a formidable future queen whose understanding of contemporary security challenges would serve the kingdom well in the years ahead. The crisis that had begun with devastating newspaper headlines and threats of constitutional crisis had concluded with a stronger monarchy, enhanced security capabilities, and greater public appreciation for the challenges facing democratic institutions. Marcus Whitmore, the faithful royal guard who had witnessed these transformative events, understood that he had served during a defining period that would shape the kingdom's future for generations to come. The royal family had learned that their role in the modern world required not just ceremonial leadership, but active engagement with complex threats that targeted the very foundations of democratic society. Their successful navigation of this challenge had established them as credible leaders in an era that demanded both traditional wisdom and contemporary sophistication. The investigation was officially concluded, the conspirators had been brought to justice, and the Kingdom of Eldoria had implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar attacks in the future. However, Marcus knew that vigilance would remain essential, as the forces that had targeted the monarchy would undoubtedly develop new methods and seek new opportunities to undermine democratic institutions. The story of the royal guard who witnessed the conspiracy against Crown Princess Victoria had concluded with justice, strengthened institutions, and a monarchy better prepared for the challenges of leadership in the modern world. The kingdom's successful defense against sophisticated foreign intelligence operations had provided valuable lessons for democratic societies everywhere about the importance of resilience, adaptation, and unwavering commitment to the principles that define free societies.